very basic questions. This is an interview of Jacob Cutler, August 8th, 2002, approximately 10:30 a.m. at the Jamaica Avenue Armory, Queens, New York. Interviewer is Michael Russell. Could you give me your full name, your date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Jacob Cutler, initial N, middle initial. Birthday is February 17, 1924, and I was born in Brooklyn.
Okay. Before you went into military service, what was your educational background?
I finished 1 year of college, and then the war started.
Okay, and did you have any jobs, or did you work before you went?
Summertime jobs, stock boy and shipping and stuff like that.
One basic question we usually ask World War II veterans, what do you remember about the day you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, it was a Sunday afternoon, and I was listening to the New York Giants football game on the radio, and they interrupted and announced that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And I said, where the heck is Pearl Harbor? I never heard of it. Of course, later we learned it was Hawaii, and the war was on.
What was your reaction to this news when you did hear it?
Well, I guess fearful, horrified.
Okay. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted in November 1942. I was 18.
And what branch of service?
I enlisted in the Army Signal Corps.
Why did you pick that?
I was interested in electronics and radio, and I used to build radios as a kid and whatnot, so I thought that would be something good. Of course, I didn't know what the Signal Corps did, but not what I expected. But
okay, why don't you just explain, this will be your story, so just tell us from when you entered service until
okay.
discharge.
I enlisted, of course, in 42. I was called into active service in April 1943. I reported to Fort Dix, New Jersey Reception Center. And there I was collared by someone who asked me if I play a musical instrument, and I was drafted into the Army band, Army Reception Center band, only for about 2 weeks because it was a temporary thing. And then I was shipped out to Signal Corps camp in Camp Crowder, Missouri, where I took basic training for about 4 weeks. And then I was shipped to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey for Signal Corps training. And I was there for about 3 months or so, I guess. When all the training and whatnot, I was assigned to a unit to go overseas. And I landed in England in November 1943.
How did you
And
cross the Atlantic?
I crossed in a in a tub. It had been a former cruise liner, Cape Town Castle. The food on it was absolutely awful, and the ship rocked and rolled because it was a small tub. We crossed in a convoy, escorted by one of the ships, which I'll always remember, was the battleship Texas, and I have a reason for remembering it. At one point, they thought there were some submarines, and the convoy stopped, and the battleships and other escorts got in closer. Turned out to be a false alarm. And we landed in, I believe it was Southampton, England, and then I was assigned to a Signal Corps battalion, 59th Signal Battalion with 5th Corps, 1st Army, and we were stationed in Taunton, England. That was south of Bristol, which was a large city. Bristol was bombed very, very heavily by the Germans. We heard them regularly. Almost every night we could hear the bombers coming over, and we could actually hear the bombs coming down. They took a terrible beating. We were there, and then I believe it was the 1st or 2nd of June, they told us, pack up, the invasion is coming. They didn't tell us just where, when, we're moving out. And
before you get into that, what were your relationships with the people of England? Did you have any contact?
People of England were very nice, friendly, very nice. If you found the pubs in the back roads, they would give you liquor, which was not available. I wasn't much of a drinker, but I started to drink gin and soda there. Gin and lime is what they drank. That hooked me on that. And yeah, they were nice in general, friendly to us. I think they were happy we were there and there to help them. And I forgot to mention that while I was in this Signal Corps camp, a new military police platoon was being formed to be security for the 5th Corps headquarters, and they asked for volunteers, and I volunteered. They say you should never volunteer in the Army, but I thought it would be a good change for me, so I volunteered, and actually when the invasion came, I was in the military police. And I believe it was, well, very early June, 1st or 2nd, or maybe the last days of May, when we moved out to a marshalling area where they then briefed us as to exactly what was going to happen. And we were scheduled for D-Day, H+3, and we couldn't understand why they needed MPs there on D-Day. But they explained to us that you'd take positions on the road and guide all the straggling troops and whatnot to their units. Just didn't work out that way. I crossed the channel on an LST tank landing ship. The invasion was supposed to be June 5th, and we started out on June 5th, and the channel and the weather was so bad that it was canceled, and we went back to the ports. And of course we were terrified, because at this time we thought, how could the Germans not have seen us? And we expected an attack any minute. So I slept on deck under a truck. I figured that would be the safest place. And the next day we started out, and we got to within wherever we were supposed to get off and get onto small landing craft. And they had these big nets over the side of the ship. Had to climb down with a 60-pound pack, carrying my tent and food and rifle and whatnot, and climbed down to get to the landing boat. The water was still very rough, and when I thought the boat was down, I jumped from the net, and then a wave lifted the boat up, and I just hit, and my legs just buckled under me, but I was unhurt. And then we started in towards shore. We were briefed and told we would land at most knee-high water. They would let us off, and we'd have to wade in. Didn't work that way. Partway across, again, our boat got pounded so hard by the waves, and there were a lot of shelling around us. Other boats were being hit. Our boat got a leak, so they took us back to the tank ship, and we had to climb back up the nets. And then we were delayed. We thought we were lucky because we were delayed a couple of hours till another boat came to get us, and same procedure, down we went. And this time we made it, except that the Navy guys were afraid they would get trapped near the shore or get hit by shell fire or whatever, so they dropped us off in chest-high water. A lot of guys were floundering, they didn't know how to swim, and they were so taken by surprise. Some went under. Fortunately, nobody in my group drowned. We all managed to get ashore, and we just raced across that beach. Was really...
What beach did you...
We landed on Omaha Beach, Easy Red sector, just to the left of the cliffs that the Rangers had climbed to try to take out the pillboxes. We landed finally at about early afternoon, I would say somewhere between 1 and 2 p.m. We were supposed to land probably at 8 or 9 a.m., original plan. But we didn't complain about that. The beach was a horrible mess. Bodies all over the place, bleeding and bloody, dead bodies. They didn't have time to remove them. And we just ran, and it was the area of the hedgerows. And on the end of the beach there was like a little bluff, maybe 8 feet high or whatever, and we took cover under there. We had to clean our rifles, and we didn't have any dry clothes, so we just stayed wet. Luckily it was warm. And later in the afternoon we moved up the road. Germans had been pushed back a couple of miles, We don't know just how far, but a couple of miles anyway. And along this road off the beach, the Germans had built a long trench with interior dugouts that they had been using as a headquarters. And presumably they never bombed the Armada because I think the weather was so bad their planes weren't able to go out. Otherwise they would have seen us for sure and hit us. And we stayed about 2 nights in this area, and we started moving in Normandy in the hedgerows. The first town we were near was Saint-Lô, and not Saint-Lô, it was Saint-sur-Mer, something sank near the ocean. And that was the first village we went through, and we moved very slowly through Normandy, through the hedgerow areas. And we were bogged down for quite a while until July. The troops were moving very slowly. The Germans were putting up very fierce resistance. And finally the time came when I guess they felt they had enough armor and big guns. Incidentally, going back to the invasion, they had these amphibious ships, boats that were called ducks, which was an anagram for something had to do with landing amphibian. And they were carrying most of our artillery for the first day. Almost everyone was sunk, so we had no guns on the beach. And the battleship Texas cruised back and forth, shelling the German positions. And I think they and the other ships that were shelling saved the day. But I always remember that battleship just cruising back and forth from about 5 miles out, firing shells into the German positions. The aircraft did a very bad job. I think the weather, they couldn't see the targets and they didn't take out everything they were supposed to. Anyway, we started moving inland and we were bogged down. Saint-Lô was the big strong point for the Germans. And finally, this time came for the breakthrough, and I was sleeping in I guess you'd call it a trench. I was about 1 foot underground, below ground or so. And about 5 in the morning, the shelling of the German position started. And it was so intense, the ground was vibrating, and these shells came overhead, sounded like trains, like a subway train screeching around a corner, the shrieks. And it was so heavy that the Germans finally broke. Many of them surrendered, and they were shaking and terrified. And they thought we had invented automatic cannon because there were so many guns being fired in sequence, non-stop, just rapidly, like it was a machine gun. And they broke, and then the big breakthrough came, and the troops moved through. We were always a few miles behind the front. We never got into really combat. D-Day was our worst day. But I was lucky that way. And we moved through. We eventually reached Paris, and the infantry marched through the famous march, and we were right behind them, and we stayed in the outskirts of Paris for one night, and then continued to move on. We went through France. At this point, we began moving fairly rapidly compared to before. And finally, France was completely liberated. We went into Luxembourg, and then we went down into Belgium, and we stayed one night overnight in Bastogne, which was later taken overrun or under siege. It was never captured by the Germans. And we moved south into this village in Belgium called Dolhain-Gelep. And it was a few miles from the German, maybe 2-3 miles from the German border. And it was the first place we finally had indoor quarters. First night we spent in a movie theater. We slept on the floor. Second night, which we were very thankful for, floor was great comfort. The next day we moved into a building nearby, which had apparently been some kind of a school, and they had dormitories. So we moved into there, and we slept on cots, folding cots, which were, as far as we were concerned, were the most comfortable things in the world at that time. And we were just waiting to break through into Germany. And what happened was, at that point,
What were some of your responsibilities as an MP during this time?
mostly it was security, guard duty. We took outposts and just did guard duty, watching out for German patrols, might break through, and to sound alarms if that happened. We weren't, we were called combat MPs because we never were in the villages with the white hats and whatnot. Never had those. We wore camouflage nets on our helmets, and that was more or less, we were security troops. I was on duty one night on a post outside the camp, outside the headquarters building. There was a walkway, it was on a street, a little booth, a little sentry booth there that had been used by the Free Belgian forces. And when we came in, we took over from them. And one night, this was late December, one of our army medics came running up to me with a little Belgian kid in tow. And he says, this kid says he saw a German paratrooper come down, all in white. There was snow on the ground then. It was winter, and it was snow. And so I sent out an alarm, and a couple of jeep loads of men went out, rode around the highway, the roads there in the area, and came back and said, it must have been his imagination. We didn't find anything. Okay. I was relieved at about 2 in the morning from my post, and I went in, I was getting ready to go to sleep, and all of a sudden, whistles blowing, everybody out, and all the jeeps went down the road with the machine guns. What happens is one of our men on a road going back, Eupen was the main headquarters. It was about 5 miles from the German border, about that much back of us. And one of our men driving there had a paratrooper land on the road in front of him, and he captured him. And he took him in the headquarters, took him prisoner, took him into headquarters, and he insisted they wake up the general. I believe it was either General Giroux or General Hodges. He refused to talk to anyone. He says, I got this guy and I want to see the general. Well, the general, they woke him and he came out and thanked the guy. I think he got a medal too. And they interviewed this, interrogated, I should say, this prisoner, and they found out that he was a stray. These guys had strayed, their parachutes had drifted or whatever, and they were landing in a big attack in an area north of us, which became the Bulge. And the target was Liège in Belgium, which was a big community, a big communication center, railroad center, communications. It was a big city. And the Germans were trying to attack that, and of course they had at this time surrounded Bastogne, and of course the surrender demand by the German general, and his response from General McAuliffe was nuts, and he became a big hero to us after that. He was wonderful, and everybody loved him. And of course they finally broke the siege, they broke the Bulge. It was a last-ditch stand. And then we crossed into Germany, and we just marched across Germany, and crossing the Rhineland, the Rhine River. That was the big thrill. We said, hey, here's the Rhine, we're crossing it. Of course, it was not a very impressive river. I think the Hudson is bigger or nicer, but it's a famous river, and it was the sort of, now we were in the heart of Germany. And of course, now we went through and we saw the destructions that guy's planes did, all the bombed out facilities and whatnot. There were some really remarkable things, though. I'm Jewish like him, but there were some things that were impressive. There were churches that had been blown up, and yet some of the things that remained were the statues of the Virgin Mary, and the crosses seemed to be unharmed. Maybe it was because they were solid stone or whatever. We don't know why. Divine intervention, nobody knows, but they were just like miraculous things, and it was more than one occasion. It happened in several places that we saw this. We went across Germany, and I entered the Buchenwald concentration camp. I was bodyguard for the Jewish chaplain, and it was only a few days after it had been freed. And we saw many of these victims. You have to excuse me. bad memory. These people were being fed by the soldiers. They couldn't feed themselves. And the dead bodies were stacked like cordwood because the Germans had been routed and couldn't clear the area. They always try to make sure that the evidence was never found. But we found it. The remains were still in the furnaces. We saw the gas chambers, and of course we saw the bodies. We saw the bunks where they'd been forced to live, bunks about as big as this floor and wide, and they just were stacked one above the other where they had to lay there and try to survive. Some survived, maybe they were late arrivals or whatever, they were in better health, and they showed the soldiers around as to what atrocities the Nazis had done. And made me happy when I saw the destruction in Germany. We had no use for any Germans. These first civilians were brought in, forced to see what they're doing. They said they didn't believe it, they didn't know, they had the crocodile tears and whatnot. Maybe some didn't know. I don't see how they could not know, because the camp was there, it was surrounded by barbed wire and trees and the smoke coming out of the chimneys. There was no way they couldn't know something terrible was going on, if not what was actually going on. I don't know how close civilians had been allowed to get there. But anyway, the Germans were routed. Some of the healthy killed some of the German guards. And we then went through and we continued up until, I think it was May 7th, we entered Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, and that's when the war ended. The Germans surrendered, and the Cold War started. Russians, Eisenhower ordered the troops to stop at Pilsen, and the Russians entered Prague, and I think there were 30 miles apart, and about 15 miles in the middle was now a barbed wire dividing line. So the Cold War was on. They weren't allowed, some of them with special passes were allowed. We weren't allowed to go there, they weren't allowed to go here, but the civilians made a great exodus. Every weekend, all the Pilseners went to Prague and all the Pragues went to Pilsen. I guess they had relatives and whatnot, and now they were free of the Germans and can do whatever they liked. And
we had any contact with the Russians at all?
No, some did. The Russians were crazy for watches. They bought any kind of a watch. I mean, the guys started sending home for watches. They get these, that time, watches, wristwatches, $2, $3, and the Russians would pay the equivalent of $50 or $100 for them, and they'd wear them on their arms. I don't know what they did with them. A lot of the Russians made their own vodka, which killed them or blinded them. They were crazy. I don't know how they made this vodka, what they made it from. Alcohol. I guess they took alcohol from the car engines or something and drank it. Many of them were blinded, and of course our guys were warned, don't take any vodka or liquor from the Russians, it's dangerous. And in Pilsen we had an easy life because now we lived in what had been an army barracks. Duties were in town. I did traffic control and I did guard duty at the Grand Hotel, which became headquarters for 5th Corps. All the big wigs, army generals and whatnot came there for conferences, and had a lot of free time, went to the beaches and watched the Pilseners, and I stayed there until October when I was told I was going home. And we went out we were shipped into France to wait for boats, for ships to take us home. And in November, finally, we were there a long time, finally in November we boarded ships to take us home, and I was in another tub, Athos II. The first Athos sank, and Athos II broke down in the ocean, and they were radioing for the Coast Guard to come and get us, but they finally got things going again, and we got into the harbor, everybody greeting us there. It was great, wonderful sight. And that was it, and everybody rushed to the PX, drank chocolate malteds, and got sick as heck. Got diarrhea because they hadn't had real milk for 2 years.
You earlier were talking about experiencing buzz bombs going over.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, these things, they were small. I have a picture of them. They were very small. They did have a cockpit which could hold one man, but I don't think they were ever piloted that we know of. They were like robots. They went up and they just landed almost at random at areas in France. I think they were more of a terrorist thing than anything else. If they hit anything, of course, they were powerful bombs. I saw one went over a hill where I was on guard duty in Belgium and exploded. I heard it and I hit the ground. I didn't know where it was coming down because you heard this awful noise, and when it stopped, you know the engines died. And it was coming down, and it came down, it whistled like a bomb, just shrieked coming down. Once I was on guard duty near a field where we had stopped, and one of them came down and it hit the field and didn't explode, and it kind of pinwheeled across the field, and it crashed into a barn, and then it exploded and blew up the whole bomb. It was maybe 50 yards or so from where I was. And that's what they did. They just came over and got to a point where they were pushed back far enough where they really couldn't do anything anymore. But then we've discovered they launched, it was the first rockets. The Germans were way ahead of us in rocket launching, and they had these V2 rockets, were really huge. I have a picture of that too. They were huge, and they would take off, and all you would see was a vapor trail. It was a blue vapor trail, and they just disappeared. And you couldn't hear them coming because they were faster than sound. And they were actually hitting London till they got pushed back too far where they couldn't reach anymore. And Hitler kept saying he had a secret weapon that was going to destroy us and win the war. And we had reason to believe that Germans were working on an atomic bomb. And we were fortunate we beat them to it. And in August, when they dropped the atom bomb in Japan, we were just excited and thrilled. Nobody thought about the horrors it created later, but as far as we're concerned, we wouldn't have to go to Japan and fight again, and it was over. After the second one, they surrendered. And it was all over, and we just waited to go home.
How do you think the war affected your life, your service?
Well, it probably changed what I would have been. Not that I have any complaints. I wanted to go to college and become a dentist, but after the war, I just couldn't concentrate on studying and whatnot. I thought of my year, the war was already on, and already my mind was elsewhere, and I had great difficulty concentrating or studying. And when I got out, I just felt I couldn't really go back to school. So I went to, since I had been interested in so much in electronics, I went to a radio school on the GI Bill. But there was really nothing, you had everything I looked at, you had to have experience. I didn't have any in that. So then I went to dental mechanics school. And I worked for a while at that. And didn't care for it much, and there wasn't really any good jobs available unless you were also very experienced, which you could only get by working, and so it was a vicious cycle. And so eventually I got into the camera business, and I was a camera salesman. I was very interested in photography, so I became a camera salesman, and then I became the buyer for a very big business, and I worked there for 33 years. I married my best friend's younger sister, her little sister.
When did you get married?
I got married and I was discharged I arrived in New York on Thanksgiving Day, 1945. I was discharged November 27th, 1945. And I started going with this girl a year later. And I got married, we were married in November 28th, 1948. And we've been happily married since then.
Your family?
I have a son and a daughter and one granddaughter who is now 26.
You belong to any veterans?
I never joined any veterans organizations. I always felt the American Legion was very, as far as I'm concerned, political and too, I don't know, I guess right-wing for me. I was more on the other side, but nothing really interested me as far as, I wasn't a joiner. I was kind of shy type person and I wasn't a joiner, and so I never joined anything.
How about any reunions or?
No, I never went to a reunion. I would have liked to go to the D-Day reunion that they had at the 50th anniversary, but the cost was much too much. It would have cost us probably about $10,000 or something, which was way beyond my means. We travel across the United States. We've been to about half the states so far, and we enjoy that, so that's what we do.
Have you made contact with anyone that you served?
No, I remember a few of the people, but I don't know. One buddy I know was very, after I had transferred to the military police, he was still in the Signal Corps, and we had been shelled, and the brunt of the shelling hit the Signal Corps battalion. And I know he was very badly wounded and sent home, but I lost track after that. And the unfortunate thing is he had been a teacher and he had a throat injury. I think he couldn't talk. It was really, but I never really kept in touch. I remember some of the people, and I think, I wonder where these guys are. I know there was one guy named John Aletto from Oneonta, New York, and a couple of years older than me. And I sometimes think about it, and I said, I wonder if I could ever contact him or reach him, but somehow I just never got around to it.
Well, Oneonta is a small town.
I know,
so
but who knows if he stayed there. He had been a teacher, and he went, I don't know if he went back and he remained there or moved to a bigger city or whatever. He could be anywhere.
No.
You want me to show us this? Well, this is what I have. My mementos.
You can hold it toward the camera.
Oh yeah, I didn't realize, and I'll try to look at it.
Can you explain your
yes.
decorations to us? And
Yeah,
those
I can do each one. The patch, this is the 5th Corps patch. This is 3rd Army. The Corps was transferred from 1st Army to the 3rd Army. That was Patton. And these are my insignia. That's my U.S. Army insignia for my uniform. That's the cross rifles are my Signal Corps insignia from my uniform. Below the patch is my Army dog tag. This ribbon, this medal is a Bronze Star medal, which I was awarded for D-Day. This is what we call the ruptured duck. It's the discharge symbol, insignia, which we put on our uniform. The ribbons are the Bronze Star, Good Conduct Medal, the
State Meritorious.
that's the State Meritorious Service Cross. I think that was, trying to remember now, that was the Victory Medal, the Army's, the American Service Medal, and the European Theater of Operations. There are 5 campaign stars and the Bronze Service Arrowhead for the D-Day landing. And these are the actual medals, the Victory Medal, the New York State Meritorious Service Cross, the European Theater Medal, the Good Conduct Medal, which is a morale medal.
Now that picture of you, when was that taken?
That was taken in Belgium in December 1944.
Okay.
Down below is the Rifle Medal, and the bars, the gold bars, were one for each 6 months served overseas, and we called them Hershey bars because General Hershey, who at the time was commander or head of the Selective Service, said the soldiers overseas should be kept there and not brought home because there would be no jobs for them. So we dubbed them Hershey bars. And of course everybody was extremely angry at him. They hated him. And this was a unit citation wreath for the unit, and this is a copy of the medal award. the
Okay.
citation.
All right, I got them all.
Guess I got them all.
Okay, and what else do you have for us?
Oh, I've got some. This is a. Let me look at the pre-service. Let's see what you can. This was a local newspaper. I guess the small copy is too small to.
Yeah, some of those bigger photographs. I
Yeah,
saw
let me
towards the
find them. Which end of this they're in? Whoops.
Whoops.
That's okay. That's old age. That's not. I might have left them. Did I leave them in the bag?
I think.
Well, anyway, this is a large. Oh, here they are. This was a picture when I was still stationed in Fort Monmouth.
And about
My
what year was
entry into service.
Okay.
This was a picture post-war taken in Pilsen by a studio photographer in Pilsen. This is a post-war picture taken after I got home and was discharged. A friend and I decided to put on all our medals. We looked like the Russians and decorate ourselves and get our picture taken for posterity. So that's what we did.
Okay.
And I have a couple of good pictures of
I think they were towards the front of that other album that's on
fell
the
down
left.
here. I should have a picture in the front here.
Yeah, right there. it
Right
is.
here I should have.
No, I think you passed over them.
Let's see.
I think there was some
Yeah, I had some
shots of you
large.
there.
Okay, here they are. I forgot they were already. This is the picture. These were both in Belgium. These were also taken by a photographer in Dolhain-Gillep. There was a photographer in one of the back streets, and a couple of us guys went in, and I took a picture with my helmet and without it. I was 20 years old at the time, and this was a picture in Pilsen, post-war. When it ended, we got outfitted with custom-fitted Eisenhower jackets. They actually had civilian tailors come and measure us and tail them so that we would look like General Eisenhower with our jackets. That was new. No more of those long blouses that they used to wear. And that's it. I guess the rest of the pictures are probably too small to copy. Just to mention,
Oh, let me get those because they're pretty good size.
yeah, I just want to mention that this was in Pilsen. We were entertained. We have Jack Benny.
Yeah, I'm getting some reflection. If you can hold, yeah, that's
better?
great. That's great, just like that. Now, where's the one with Jack Benny?
Okay, over here, Jack Benny was there with a USO tour with Ingrid Bergman, Martha Tilton, the singer, and Larry Adler, the harmonica player, who just died a few months ago.
Oh, really?
Yes. He was great. And they put on, and I must say that Jack Benny and Martha and Ingrid Bergman, unlike many of the other famous entertainers who came over, just walked around the streets as ordinary people, greeted all the soldiers, and made sure the soldiers, not the officers, got the best seats for the shows.
Did you see any other U.S. shows?
No, it was the only show that we actually saw was this one, and they put on some great performances. Ingrid Bergman did a selection that she did for the movie Joan of Arc, and Larry Adler, of course, played for us. Martha Tilton sang, and Jack Benny did his funny pieces, and they were great. So happy to see some people like that.
Okay.
It was wonderful.
I got the photos.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you very much, yes.
Okay.
I thought one of the photographs slid down into
Yes,
the chair.
it did. It was one of these duplicates.
There it is.
Oh, here we go.
Just didn't want you to lose that.
Well, that's just a duplicate,
Well,
a print, a
still.
copy of the other one. So
All right,
it's
well,
not
thank you very
too.
much.
Yes.
I thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Well, and we